everyone has learned about in this crazy ride that we've had on Zoom. So I wanted to just set our class up today because this is core yoga, and a lot of people come to a core class expecting to get flat abs or look better in their bathing suits. And really that's not my intention at all of offering core yoga. I'm really intending to offer a practice that helps us to integrate the power that's naturally found in the center of the body with all of you. So while you're just taking a quick rest here in constructed rest, I'd like to read to you from a book by Stephen Cope. And after class, I'm happy to talk about the book and show you it if you're interested. But he talks about what makes yoga so important, and also what really allows us to listen to the voice of the body. Because the body, especially the middle part of your body, has so much to say to you. It's so vitally important, and we often don't pay attention. So here's just a few things to kind of set the mood for our class today. Stephen writes, creating an environment in which concentration is supported. So as best as we can, we create a quiet space where we'll be uninterrupted. Working from home is an extra challenge, I know, but I don't even tend to play music a lot of times when I'm teaching anymore because I really want to set it up so people can really concentrate on their own personal experience. We're going to move slowly and deliberately today as best as we can. Ever get a knot in your shoelace or some other kind of complicated knot? If you start yanking very quickly on that, the knot only becomes more stubborn and intractable. So we're going to really work hard on being gentle with the knots that we discover in our body. We'll create, I hope, a little bit of absorption in that with the mind that allows our precise internal sensations to be tracked more consciously. We're going to keep awareness focused on internal sensations and feelings. Like I said, with a core class, we often think about how we look in our bathing suits or how other people judge the shape of our core. I'm really not interested in that, and I hope you lose interest really fast. Alignment is important in our postures, but too much preoccupation with that external experience will trigger an identification with the false self, the part of us that really isn't real. So we want to really get to the real core of things today. So letting go of the externals and focusing more on internal sensations. Moving as gently as you can without strain. This is really important, especially in a core class, when we're asking all of your power to come to the party. If you're straining and grunting and, as my friend Deb says, making face asana, we're not getting the integration of the muscles that we want. Proper core work should be almost effortless. And cultivating persistence and patience. And I'm going to emphasize the second word there. That a lot of the movements that we're going to come into today really aren't exciting. They're not sexy, but they are really important for building the foundation. So being persistent and being patient. And that's really how I wanted to talk about our class this afternoon, how I wanted to emphasize our work. So now that we've got kind of a mood settled, I'm going to guide you, I hope, in some gentle movements right there on your mat. So we'll begin by placing the hands, one hand on the side of your ribs and the other hand on your lower kind of belly. So please keep your elbows on the ground so you're not straining your shoulders to reach for a special spot. Just be as relaxed as possible. And I want us to start with that internal focus if we can. So breathing in and out through the nose as much as makes sense. And then just breathing in a natural, easy way. Please don't force or pretend to do anything yoga-like. And begin to connect with these shape changes that occur spontaneously in your own body. So even a yoga teacher, doesn't matter how wonderful they are, can tell you how to breathe. You already know the best way to breathe. I just would like right now to set an intention to connect with how you're breathing. And what you might be noticing is that one or both of your hands are moving slightly as you breathe in and you breathe out. While you're taking these soft, natural breaths, can you internalize your sight, use your powers of imagination as best as you can, to imagine what's happening as the body moves during the breath. And sometimes that's really hard to do. We look in the mirror, we don't think about all these internal things going on. So how are you supposed to know what's going on in there? Well, we're going to work a little bit in our class today to try to figure things out. So let's take a moment to take both hands now to the sides of the ribs, the right hand on the right side, left hand on the left side. Again, elbows still resting on the ground, so hopefully there's no strain on your shoulders. And start to take a little bit deeper breath if you can. So we're looking now to notice that the side ribs, the bottom kind of, tend to move outward on the inhale. There's a flaring out. And we're not doing that on purpose. That's happening because you're breathing in. On the exhale, you notice that the ribs kind of float back towards each other. What you're feeling under your hands, especially if your hands are oriented towards the bottom of your rib cage, what you're feeling under your hands is your diaphragm moving. The diaphragm is a big muscle that spans right the full width of your torso all the way around, kind of like a big umbrella. And what you're doing is you're feeling that diaphragm expand down into the abdomen as you inhale and retract back up to hug the lungs on the exhale. This is something that happens every breath you take. You don't have to plan it. But in yoga, we try to become more aware of that mechanism. So the diaphragm is a huge, important core muscle. And we'll be talking more about that. Then if you could, you can let your arms rest wherever you like. I'd like us to just kind of pay attention a little bit to a second diaphragm. You're like, what? Second diaphragm? If we can draw awareness now to the pelvic floor. This is the area of muscle between the sitting bones and around the tailbone. And this is an area of very important muscle that actually moves as well as you breathe. So just a moment to connect as best as we can with this rather mysterious area. On the inhale, because the abdomen expands a little bit, we need to relax the pressure on the pelvic floor. So the pelvic floor relaxes. You might even imagine that the sitting bones separate a little bit. And then as you exhale, because the diaphragm retracts up to hug the lungs, the secondary diaphragm in the pelvic floor can also kind of lift up a little bit and provide a little bit of support for that lovely hug for the heart and the lungs. So see if you can imagine or even feel your sitting bones floating a little bit as you breathe, opening apart ever so slightly on the inhale and collecting and lifting on the exhale. And this is not anything you're aggressively trying to sort out with a bunch of really strong muscle contractions. This happens every day, every breath, when your pelvic floor is integrated nicely with your diaphragm, when they're on, BFF status. And that there can be a lot of things that interrupt that. I had a couple kids that certainly kicked the kahunas out of that. So it took a long time. It's an ongoing process to get that relationship between the main diaphragm and the secondary diaphragm in the pelvic floor. All right. So you've got the roof of your core, you've got the floor of your core. Let's talk about the front of your core. Take your hands again and let's place them on the low belly. Now, if you feel around at the front of your belly, you probably have some protruding bones that are sticking up. When I was young and skinny, we called these bumper bones, but I won't admit to that now, of course. They're actually called the anterior superior iliac crest, but the bumper bone is a good descriptive term. So if you can find your bumper bone and then just move maybe an inch inward towards the center of your belly and press just very light pressure on those 2 points. So you're into soft tissue now inside the crest of the hip bone. And I want you, if you can, to make a little noise or cough. And you might feel something under your fingers. One of my teachers calls these the coughing muscle. Another one of my teachers calls these the seatbelt muscles. And I like the seatbelt muscle because these muscles are deep abdominal muscles. The fibers move across your belly and they function like a seatbelt. And like a seatbelt, we don't want them too tight because then it's too hard to move. But you do want them to engage during times of movement so that you stay safe. So you've just discovered your transverses abdominis muscles, which are very important part of the core. I want to just do one more group of muscles, and then we're going to come into some bigger movements and you can maybe hopefully feel these muscles talking to each other and feeling more coordinated. If you could take one of your hands and slide it in the curve of your low back. So in the position of constructed rest, usually there's a slight curve to the low back in the lumbar spine area. If you can't fit your whole hand underneath there, certainly don't worry, but maybe just one finger will slip in, or even a fold of a washcloth might be enough to give you some feedback, some visceral feedback. And then do a couple pelvic tilts. You know what I'm talking about? When you roll your pelvis so the tailbone rolls down towards your heels, your back will be flattened into the floor a little bit, and then you let your back arch back up into its natural curve. So just a couple pelvic tilts there, just a few, nothing that might strain your low back. And then you're going to notice, I think, that there's a way now to keep the natural curve to your back. So keep the hand slid underneath there, or finger tucked underneath there. The natural curve is now in your low back. You're not trying to flatten it on a pelvic tilt. Start to lift one bent leg a little bit up from the floor. So not too much, you're not doing any big stretch. Just lift that one bent leg a little bit up from the floor and look what happens in your low back. Can you feel the curve changing? Try your other leg. And do like the super slow little march on your floor. Both knees are bent. And you're just lifting one foot a little tiny bit and then the other foot a little tiny bit, but pay very close attention to what happens in your low back. Now, can you do that movement with your legs without changing the curve of your low back, letting it be absolutely natural? Now you're using a group of muscles in your lower spine called the multifidi that are really important for stabilizing that tender part of our lowest back. Notice the movement of your legs as you do this slow supine march. This is the same movement that you would do if you were out for a walk. So if any of you are like me, and after you go for a walk, you tend to have soreness in your low back sometimes, aha, we found out we need to get better coordinated in our core. Okay, let's roll over to your side. And slowly press your way up from the floor. And we'll come to mountain pose. So we're coming to a standing position. Okay. So I'm going to stand a little closer to the computer so I can show some things. I know you can't see my face, but there's nothing to see there anyway. I'm turning sideways to show you the typical way that I would normally stand. Normally, if I don't think about it, this is the way I stand. You notice the exaggerated curve in the lumbar spine and the locked knee. This is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on my back, plus it's not allowing me to breathe fully because my core is not integrated. So I'm turning sideways, you're fine where you are, but as you take mountain pose, can you think about the movement you just did in the lower back? You want to find your natural lumbar curve, not something that's exaggerated, nor do we want to do the 1980s 20-minute workout tilt either. We want a natural curve in the back. Once you kind of sense that, and maybe you have to do a few of those pelvic tilts to find it. Once you sense that, can you bring awareness here to the bumper bones and imagine those deep abdominal fibers that are kind of knitting the bumper bones closer together, like a seatbelt coming together. Now we'll take a few deep breaths, and we're welcome to use the arms, lifting up on the inhales and bringing them back down on the exhales. But as you do that, watch the diaphragm in your chest and abdomen move and see if you can start sensing the pelvic floor. Move back a little bit now. And we'll move into some different movements. So take one more breath like this. Just kind of starting to really feel the integration of those four key components that we worked on when we were still lying down. Okay, let's take our feet a little wider apart. You might want to face the side of your mat for this. I like to turn my feet out, maybe like 45-degree angle or something, so that when you bend your knees, you notice your knees are pointing in the same direction as your toes. And this isn't a deep knee bend. We're going to try a little bit more of that integration of the top of the core, the bottom of the core, the front of the core, and the back of the core. So when we come down into a little bit of a squat, excuse me, I just turned sideways to show this, we don't want to stick our buttocks out the way we might do in some other poses. We want to drop the buttocks straight down. Keep a neutral curve in the lower back. We're using the back muscles in an appropriate way there. Okay, So let's take an inhale, open up, little tiny squat, not too deep. Exhale, hands to the heart. So it's not a very complicated movement, small movement. Make it really comfortable for you. Remember, we talked about slow and patient. Now let's really see if we can start to feel into those 4 components of the core. On the inhale, we're expanding. On the exhale, we're contracting. And bring particular awareness, if you can, to the pelvic floor. Expanding on the inhale and lifting and contracting on the exhale. Try that once more. And then come back to mountain pose just for a quick reset. You may find that your hips, your low back, your belly feels somewhat energized in comparison to, say, I spent a lot of time sitting at a computer today. So I feel much more aware of the internals in this part of my body. In yogic philosophy, we talk a lot about this part of the body as being a source of power. So it's nice to be more connected to that. Let's try a different standing pose. Let's try warrior 1. So from the front of your mat, step one leg back and turn the foot down so the whole foot is on the ground. The front knee is bent and facing straight ahead. And I have equal weight in both of my feet. Now I'm going to turn so I can see you a little bit better, but you're good right where you are. Okay, so this is the traditional stance for warrior 1. Before we start adding the arms and the breathing focus, I want to talk a little bit about integrating the core. So in order to keep a nice neutral curve in the low back, you may have to make a little correction now of tucking the tailbone under a little bit, engaging the back glute, and knitting together the 2 bumper bones with your seatbelt muscles. Does anybody else find that that just makes them feel safer in the low back? So sometimes in our hurry to go into a really deep warrior 1, we sacrifice our low back health. We don't really use our core. When you're ready, we're going to focus a little bit now on the diaphragm up here, on the rib cage. We want to really use the diaphragm in 3 dimensions. So let's breathe and think about different things with each breath. As you inhale and expand, open the ribs wide to the side. Exhale, bring them in. So try that for a couple breaths. As the elbows pull out, the rib cage expands out to the side. We want to try to avoid pushing the rib cage forward. We want to work in all 3 dimensions. So I like to work in the dimensions that we don't look at in the mirror. Okay, let's change the movement of the arms a little bit. As you inhale this time, bring the elbows back, shoulder blades together, and then exhale, relax that. Inhale, shoulders, blades together, elbows back, and then relax. And now we're thinking more about the back ribs and noticing the movement in the back ribs behind the heart when we're breathing. Take one more breath. And then we can step into mountain pose just to observe how that feels, just to do a reset. So if you may find that you're a lot more aware of this area of the body, and we can have a lot of restrictions. Literally, the diaphragm can get stuck in a lot of this part of the body. So you may find that you're starting to have some new awareness there. Let's take the other leg back, turn the foot, find our warrior 1 stance on this side. And because we use the 2 sides of our bodies so differently, you may notice that the sensations feel different. The capacity for movement is different. So if we dial it back, take our time, we can pick up on these little cues. We start by inhaling, side ribs flare open. Exhale, they come back together. Try not to let your front ribs flare forward. We want to integrate the core. So we're keeping all fibers gathered in that don't have a specific job to do. And then we can change up the arm movement, change our focus a little bit. As you draw the elbows back, think about the shoulder blades coming together at the spine and the diaphragm moving in the back body. So the diaphragm's a bit like an umbrella, and you know for an umbrella to be useful, it's got to open all the way around, 360 degrees. So that's what we're working on here. One more breath. And then let's take a break in our mountain pose. Okay, I'm going to bring my blanket back for a little bit of cushion for my knees. If you would prefer not to be on your knees, you can use a chair for this. So you would be standing, and as we fold forward, instead of being on the knees, you'd be standing, and you fold forward hands to the chair instead of coming all the way to the floor. So if you want to modify with a chair, that's fine. So I'm going to start standing on my knees. I've got my back toes tucked under. That helps to stabilize some people's knees and can make it a little bit more comfortable. If that doesn't work for you, let your feet be flat. We're starting here, if we can, with the hands behind us, palms facing outward, and looking for that nice neutral curve to the low back. We're working on a really important aspect of core integration by moving the body in relationship to fixed legs. When you're ready, let's inhale, spread the arms, lift them as high as you like. As you exhale, gather the seatbelt muscles together, hinge at the seatbelt, and touch the floor in front of you. Inhale, come back up, and exhale, release the hands to the sacrum. So if you're using the chair, you'll be standing on your feet and just touching the chair. Principles are the same. So let's try that for a few times, nice and slow. The slower you go, the harder it is. Inhale. Exhale, seatbelt muscles are tightening, pulling the hips back. You're working to touch down slowly to the floor. Inhale, come back up. Try to keep the front ribs from flaring. And exhale, hands to the low back. So I'm just going to have a peek at what you're doing here. If you could keep repeating that a couple more times. And it's really quite challenging, isn't it, to lean forward and touch the ground. But you're really using the seatbelt muscles in order for you to find that. Can we do two more? If you need to rest in child's pose, of course, take child's pose, but maybe two more. Good. And then let's come forward right onto the belly, if that's okay. If you're following along from home, watching this recording, and you don't care to be on the belly, you can use a chair to modify for this next movement. And I'll briefly demonstrate that while everybody's getting ready. So what you would do is you would have the chair right here in front of you, hang on to the back of the chair, and then follow our movements as we're going to be doing them on the ground. So if you don't care to be on your belly, grab a chair, put the back of the chair to your belly, and follow along. For those of us who are on the floor, you might want to wiggle and jiggle a little bit to kind of relax your body into the support of the earth. Once again, briefly and mentally, visit the parts of the body that we talked about at the beginning of class. So if you take a quite deep, deliberate breath, you may feel all dimensions of the diaphragm working. You may notice on the exhales that you can feel the sitting bones getting closer together, and almost like an invisible column of energy and stabilization zipping right up the center of your torso on the exhales as you lift up to hug the lungs and the heart on your exhale. And then you might also feel the seatbelt muscles. You can touch base with them here. You might actually feel the bumper bones migrating closer to each other because they're kind of exposed there into the floor. And then notice you want to even make a few pelvic tilts here to find that neutral back arch. When we lie on our bellies, it takes us into a little bit of an exaggerated curve in our lumbar spine. So sometimes you have to push the fronts of your pelvis down into the floor, like the bumper bones into the floor, so that you can have a neutral back. And if you notice laying on your belly irritates your low back, this could be a really important clue for you. Okay, so we're going to come into some leg movement first. So you can have your hands under your forehead. I would prefer, if at all possible, you not turn your head to one side for this. So maybe your hands have to be under your chin. And then if you're standing at the back of the chair, just stand in mountain pose and follow with us. Now, being aware of the angle of your low back, energize your right leg and lift it up behind you. Exhale, lower it down. And then again, inhale, lift up the right leg and just slowly move back and forth a couple times with that. Now, be really aware of the curve of your low back. Remember I said we're going to take almost micro movements. But when you take your leg back, if the low back does all the work, you're not working some really important muscles that support core, like your gluteus muscles and your hamstring muscles. So keep the right bumper bone pressed into the floor or into the chair and just lift the leg back. It might not be near as much as you thought you were going to lift it. Do you have two more that you can do with that right leg? And then let's take a rest. Take a big breath, touching base with all four components of the core, keeping them alive in your awareness, and then move to the left leg at your leisure. Now the journey here could be different because the left leg has done different work for you all the way along. And we're not trying to get the leg really far away from you. This isn't a flexibility demonstration. This is a real core integration exercise. So when you're walking through life, you want to climb stairs or go for a bike ride, your legs are going to move you, but the core moves the legs. You don't want the legs to be doing something different than what the core is doing. You want it all integrated. So you're working on that communication right now. Keep the left bumper bone pushing into the floor or the chair. Hopefully you're feeling the left buttock and the left hamstrings at the back of your thigh, giving you a little feedback. Maybe just one more breath here. Wonderful. Just rest. If you notice that you're getting quite fatigued, your back muscles are sore, especially if you have a history of low back trouble, the muscles might be just like very nervous and not sure you know what you're doing. You could be getting feedback. So what you could do is either sit down in the chair if you've got a chair and just rest. You can roll over onto your back and come back to constructed rest. Or if you feel energized, if you feel positive about what we're doing, then we can continue by adding some arm movement. This will load up the muscles a little bit more longer levers, more force. But if you're ready to strengthen a bit more, this might be appropriate. If you want to, you can take the arms up alongside your ears. So they'd be, if you're in a prone position, they're on the floor like Superman. If you're standing, you're in like an extended mountain pose. Same principles. We'll work right leg, left arm. Inhale, extend the body on a diagonal. Exhale, return to the opening position. And on the inhale, we want to really feel the distance from the right toes to the left fingertips extend as much as possible. So it's not how high from the floor you can lift your limbs, but how long you can get. Now, are your bumper bones at the front of your pelvis staying even? They're either pressed into the floor or pressed into the back of the chair. And I'm hoping with the care that we're taking here, we're not feeling any feedback from the lower back. In fact, this exercise can be very, very helpful for people who have herniations of the disc or they're trying to recuperate from that. But it needs to be done with a lot of awareness. Let's just take one more breath with the right leg doing the big heavy lifting, and then we can rest. As you take a breath in between sides, revisit all four aspects of your core. The more you can keep that in your fresh mind, say you're going out for a hike later or you want to do a Zumba class tomorrow, the more you can keep that programming fresh in your mind, the happier your back and belly will be with you. Let's go left leg, right arm now. Extending on the inhale, lengthening as much as possible. And we're trying not to rock from side to side when we do this. We're trying to use all 4 aspects of our core to keep our body stable. Wonderful. Just one more breath with the left leg now. Left leg, right arm. Yeah, good. And then let's relax. For those of you that were using a chair, could you maybe slowly start to make your way to the floor? And for those of us that were on our bellies, can we please roll over onto our backs? Bend your knees and come back to constructed rest. Thank you. Notice the relationship you have to breathing in this moment. I wonder if it's changed at all in the half an hour we've been doing all of our core integration work. Okay. Do you remember we started moving towards something earlier where we were lifting 1 foot at a time? We might go back to that. So touch base mentally with your diaphragm, your pelvic floor, your seatbelt muscles, and the low back muscles. Have them all fresh and ready to talk to each other. And then start to lift 1 foot up off the floor and then lower it. Lift the other foot up off the floor and lower it, just to the degree that you start to feel some action in your spine, but you're still able to stabilize and the action's not knocking your spine out of its natural curves. Now, this might be a really important place for you to stay, especially if you have a lot of hip pain, pelvic instability, a history of low back pain. This is a really important place to stay and play for a little while. Now, for my friends that are doing quite comfortable with this and want a little bit more engagement, lift both feet at the same time. Bring your shins parallel to the floor and your knees centered over your hips. Check back with your low back. Does it have the same curve in it that it had right from the beginning? We're going to do the reverse of the slow march. As you exhale, drop 1 foot down to the floor. The knee can stay bent at the same 90-degree angle as you let that leg touch down. Bring on the inhale, the right knee up beside the left knee, shins are parallel. And then exhale, lower the left foot to the ground. So the knees are separating from each other as you reach the left foot out to touch down. Bring the knees back to a parallel position. So this is like toe touchdown. Knees are over top of the hips, so they're not too close to the body. And while you're doing this movement, you're really noticing the stability in your low back. Slow it down even more. Breathe more slowly. If you're marching too quickly, you might be jumping some steps. Next time you touch the left foot down, bring the left knee back and let's hug both knees into the chest. Now the lower back will flatten right into the floor now, and you might find it comfortable to do a little bit of moving around, rolling from side to side or some other type of movement. Nothing too extreme. Let's roll over to our side and press up from the floor. And I want to use some of the skills that we've been working on our backs and bring them into the classic bridge, boat pose of yoga. So I'm going to move back over to my mat to come along with you on this. So we want to start in a position where our knees are bent and the spine is long. Touch your lower back and notice if there's a natural curve in the lower back. And we're hoping that there is. If you have to be like this in order to sit up, it would be better to work from your back. So go back and repeat what we just did until you get a little bit more strengthening and integration in the core. But if it's okay for you to sit like this, take your hands to behind your thighs. Very loose connection here. I'm not pulling or aggressive in any way. And I'm going to do the same toe touch that I did from lying down. This is my inhale, exhale, inhale, and exhale. Now this is a lot harder because because you're integrating the strength of the legs with the strength of the core, and that's happening through the marriage of the breath. Notice my back is not, I hope it's not, changing shape. And I know probably you do boat pose a lot in your yoga practice, but have you ever really noticed how to keep your back stable? So if you're longing to go into full boat pose, I'm not going to hold you back, but maybe it's interesting to stay here and really peel the layers of boat pose apart and notice the stabilization, integration. Good. You might want to come up now, and just like we did from our back, you can have your hands behind your thighs and just kind of do a little gentle lengthening or cat back sort of stretch to kind of open up the back a little bit. Take a deep breath, deeper breath maybe than you've taken already today in class, just to kind of really open up the space behind the heart in the back of the spine. Okay, I have another kneeling posture that I put in here, and I know that that doesn't work for a lot of people, putting pressure on their knees. So this is what you could do alternatively. You could come into a bit of a easy triangle stance and then move with us from a standing position. So if you don't want to wait there on your knee, feel free to be on your feet. If you're okay on your knees, you turn sideways on the mat, put your knee on the ground, have your foot directly behind the knee and your hip directly over the knee. The other leg is stretched out, and I'm trying to make some good contact with the floor over there. Briefly revisit the core in your own imagination. So the big umbrella-like diaphragm, the pelvic floor being mobile and fluid with the breath, good seatbelt control, and a neutral curve in my low back. Inhale, lengthen the whole side of the body, and exhale, lean straight out to the side. And come back and forth a few times. So what we're doing here is we're working on a muscle in the low back, and I'm going to turn around and show you the muscle I mean. We're working on this muscle right here. It goes from the top of your hip bone up to the bottom of your rib, and it tends to be quite tight on many of us. And also it can be the muscle that really helps you, really makes you feel like your back is out. Sometimes you have to lean all the way over to one side like Quasimodo. After you've moved in and out of the posture a few times, you might choose to explore staying. Really draw awareness to the side ribs. Remember we talked about flaring out to the side? This is a real invitation to work the core muscles at the side of the body. And then we're going to take this into some movement again. So if you're standing, it's exactly the same. On the inhale, take your rib cage, pull it back, open up, look up to the sky if your neck will allow that. And on the exhale, round out into a little bit of a cat back and kind of touch towards the floor. Obviously, you're not needing to touch all the way to the floor. Inhale, open up, and exhale, round out towards the floor. So we're really working into this whole side of the diaphragm, the muscles that attach the diaphragm, or the connective tissue that attaches the diaphragm to all the working muscles of the core. Maybe one more breath. And then inhale up, you can come to mountain pose if you're standing. If thunderbolt pose is possible for you, the one that I'm using here, or else you can turn your legs and stretch your legs out in front of you if thunderbolt pose doesn't work. Just take a moment to, again, mentally visit with all those sections of your core. The more you can make friends with all these internal workings, the more automatically you'll get that support when you want to go do active things. Let's move our body's position for the second side. So remember, this is available using a standing position as well, so you don't have to stand. I have blankets under my knee. When you're ready, inhale, exhale into the gate pose, and move back and forth with your breath. So as best as you can, focus your attention on the internal workings of this side of the body. Typically, you'll feel, most of us do, differently about this side of the body than you did the first side. And we don't have to tell a story about why that is, but it really is very important for you to acknowledge that your experience changes and evolves. Like any good relationship, you want to know all the juicy gossip, right? You might want to hold gate pose for a few breaths, breathing deeply into the side ribs, just like you did when you were lying on the ground at the very beginning of class. Taking rests, taking breaks from this whenever you need to, but if you want to, we can move into that dynamic kind of a modification. Inhale, ribs pull back. Exhale, we round out like a cat back and touch towards that side of the floor. No need to force to get to the floor. I really want to be able to stretch out the back here. And move a couple more times with your own breath. And then we'll come to a neutral pose. That might have been mountain pose if you were standing for that, or a thunderbolt pose if your knees are happy with this. Take a breath, go inside, be internal. In our culture, there's such a revulsion sometimes for the stuff that goes on in here. But you know how important all this stuff is? I mean, this is where all your so hardworking organs are. Your lovely heart pumping, your lovely lungs oxygenating every tissue. To revile the stuff that goes on in here is to not love your life. So today I'm asking you to go inside and really experience your core. Let's come down onto our backs. And you may want to have a block handy, and you may want to get your yoga strap for our few closing movements. So again, you want your spine, if possible, to be as neutral as you can. So no pillow under the neck. I really have to strongly suggest that right now. Place a block between the knees if you have it. If you don't have a block, you could always use a full box of Kleenex, and it's not absolutely necessary. It just helps us to keep the integration. Press your arms firmly into the floor, and as you inhale, push your feet firmly into the floor, engage the butt and the hamstrings, and push the knees away from you. So it looks like bridge pose. Exhale, relax. But it's really an engagement of these muscles back here that really support the core. So you might not lift up as high in bridge pose as you are accustomed to, but hopefully you feel a lot more activity in the posterior kinetic chain. That's your glutes and your hamstrings. And you can take that a couple more times, rest if you need to. And then the block is good. You can get rid of that. Grab a hold of your yoga strap or TheraBand, if the case may be. And you can choose which leg works better for you first. I'm going to ask you to lift one leg up, take the band around the ball of the foot, and come into your standard hand to big toe pose. I'm going to come a little closer to the computer now so I can see you better. And here's where it gets kind of interesting in terms of core. Many of my yoga friends are very flexible and they can get their leg way up there, and that's wonderful. Big hamstring stretch, how exciting. But I want to talk about how the leg integrates with the core today. So while your leg is up there, take lots of straps so you're not stressed at all. Do a few pelvic tilts. You know, remember we did those earlier? Yeah. And find neutral spine in your low back. Make sure that that little natural curve that you were supporting earlier in practice is still there. Essentially, you'll be taking your tailbone and turning it down towards the floor or the heel that's still on the ground. Use your seatbelt muscles now. So bring your two bumper bones closer together. Take some deep breaths, letting the pelvic floor and the main diaphragm float freely. Now punch up out of the ball of your foot and heel towards the ceiling, or at least away from you. Even if your leg isn't all the way up to the ceiling, I want a straight knee if possible, and really punch that foot away from you, maintaining that relationship of your spine to the earth that you discovered in constructed rest at the very beginning of the class. Do you feel that this posture is evolving for you, that's different somehow today? Another way to say this would be to take the sitting bone, whatever leg is up in the air, your right or your left, take that sitting bone and push it down to the wall in front of you. Lengthen that side of your low back. Take one more breath. And then you can slowly release the strap and let your feet come to the floor. Sometimes it's fun to stretch your legs out for a minute. I like how that feels so different. The right to the left leg feels so different after that. So see, that's what we're talking about at the beginning of class, about really internalizing, focusing on sensation, paying attention to yourself. All of us need this self-care, and all of us need to feel heard. And maybe we have to do a lot more of that for ourselves these days, being held back from friends and family the way we are. So give yourself that time. All right, bent knees, feet on the floor, constructed rest. Take the tie around the ball of the other foot, and let's repeat the posture on this side. So go slow. When your leg is in place, do a few pelvic tilts. If you can't find any movement at all in your low back, then make sure the other knee is bent, foot on the floor, and then let your leg move away from your body a little bit, so you're using more of the tie for the strap, and then that might give you some more room in your low back. Okay, once you've discovered neutral spine in your lower back, you know, I sometimes say a little mouse could drive his Corvette underneath you in that little lumbar curve. Then you want to see if you can bring the bumper bones together using your coughing muscles or the seatbelt muscles, and take deep breaths so that the diaphragm and the pelvic floor diaphragm are free floating and relaxed. So even though the leg in the air is working hard, you're really punching up out of the foot. You're using your leg, not your arms and shoulders. They're pretty relaxed. The jaw's pretty relaxed. You're really using the leg that's up in the air. Your belly floats freely with the breath. You're not holding your guts in. You're not braced for trouble. You're strong and confident. Yeah. And the final little pièce de résistance could be taking that sitting bone and lengthening it away from you, whatever leg is up in the air. Okay. Last breath here. And then we could bring both feet to the floor. And you may choose to stretch your legs out briefly just to kind of drink in all the subtleties from that pose. One of the first teachers that taught that to me is participating with us today. Hi, Joe. And the pose is just as fascinating to me 20 years later as it was when she started teaching it all those years ago. And it always reveals something new. Let's finish with a supine twist. I'm going to guide you to a particular version of it. If there's another twist that you like better, if you feel safer doing a different kind of twist, of course. Please bend your knees, stand your feet on the floor. And then as if you were going to do bridge pose, lift your bum up and set it down on the left side of the mat. So your hips are off center from your shoulders and your feet. Please bring your right leg to a straight position and bring your left knee in towards your chest. And I like to use my right arm to support the left leg, not to pull on it, but to support it. So I have my right hand here hooked up underneath my left leg to support it. And begin to slowly roll off to the right onto the outer left hip. There's no pressure here to bring the right knee towards the ground. In fact, I prefer you don't. I'd love your knee not to go lower than the level of your left hip. That's why your right arm can support it. And then relax your left shoulder back to the ground. And keep this twist really kind of focused in the lower back area. Remember in gate pose, I was pointing out those muscles in the lower back. So a lot of people use this twist. They go right into the extreme version. They use it to crack their back and that sort of thing. I'm getting very cautious of that in my old age. And I like this really getting into the outer left hip thing. I like the stretching the little muscles that attach to the iliotibial tract on the outside of my left thigh. It really affects your knee health. And then let's go into some nice, the deepest breathing you've done yet. Let's go into some really nice deep breathing. Yeah. Letting the diaphragm really have a big dance, big breath. Yeah. Okay. When it's time to leave the posture, you can use your right hand to kind of lift the left leg a little bit and as naturally as possible, kind of roll back over onto your back, bend your right knee, feet on the floor, shift your hips back to the neutral position and just dive internally. Check inside. How did it feel to hold back a little bit? If you're the kind of person that, always brings their knee to the floor or does the extreme version of the twist, how did it feel not to do the whole twist? Is there anything new that you want to explore for a breath or two? To do this side, we'll lift the hips up as though you were going to do bridge pose and plop them down on the right side of your mat. So your hips are off center to your shoulders and feet. Straighten out your left leg, support your right leg, and gently move towards the left. Yeah. And I would love it this time is if you kept your right knee up at the same level or even a little above your right hip so that you're not pulling on the SI joints all the time. A lot of us yogis are very flexible. That's why we like yoga to start with. And especially as women, we can really overdo the SI joint stuff. And then when you get to be my age, they get really cranky and act up at the worst times. So doing the twist in this way is very respectful of how your sacrum and your hip bones talk to each other. Can we go into those nice deep breaths again? And then to pull out of the posture, you can use your left hand to help right your right leg and just kind of naturally roll onto your back. Yeah. Now, is there anything else you need to do to kind of help yourself feel integrated? If you're doing pretty good, we can move into Shavasana now. But take any other steps that you need to. Make sure you're warm enough. If stretching your legs out in traditional Shavasana just doesn't feel right, you could try a rolled blanket or pillow under your knees. But I'd love your legs to be able to relax today. Overall, you might feel less need for support than you did when you first got onto the floor at 5 o'clock today. And we started out our class by reading a little bit from Stephen Cope's book. I just want to go back over some of the principles so that we remember when we're doing Shavasana how important they are. We want to create an environment in which your concentration is supported. Our culture does not support focus. So turning off any devices that you don't absolutely have to have, turn off the pinging on the devices you are using. Closing your eyes, if that's helpful. Shutting the door so the pets and children can't get in. If you need to make any adjustments, make them slowly deliberately and with full awareness. So you're not twitching and glitching just because it's habit. You're really focused on any movements you need to make, and you're really sure you need to make those movements. Please keep your awareness focused on your internal landscape. So don't worry about the expression on your face or what you're wearing. Really try to connect with maybe the feeling of your lungs filling and releasing, your heart beat maybe slowing down as we come to rest. And then we cultivate a great patience in Shavasana. Not much is going on. It can be quite boring. But we cultivate a great patience and focus. It's not about falling asleep. It's not about really being 100% relaxed, actually. Shavasana is really about turning all of that attention that you shower on everything and everyone else and bringing it back to your present moment experience. There's nothing more important in this moment than feeling the breath move your body, and feeling the earth reach up to support your body. There's nothing more important than being you and only you at your essence in this moment. If you have the luxury of a little bit more time to spend in Shavasana, it would be really helpful. 10 to 15 minutes here after the intense work that you've done today would be a great idea. But if you have an appointment and need to move on, that's our modern world, isn't it? Be very gentle. There's one more principle of Stephen Cope's guidelines that we talked about at the beginning, but I didn't mention in Shavasana, and that's very slow and deliberate movement. So as you wiggle your toes and wiggle your fingers, roll your ankles and roll your wrists, really stay tuned in to the subtleties of these movements, how they kind of shift the whole fabric of your body. Bend your knees one at a time, taking tender care of your low back. Roll over to your side. And as you press up from the floor, let your head hang heavy. Don't lift up with your head first. That can create so much tension over time in our necks. Find yourself a comfortable seat, which could be on the floor, it might be in the chair. And I'm going to invite you to join me in chanting Om to kind of weave all of this together and help it settle into a more permanent place. So here we go. I'm inhaling now. Namaste. So I'd love to stay and chat if anybody has time to do that.